The first thing you need to do is create the gradient you'll use to light paint. I began this shoot with Photoshop. First, I created a new document. Photoshop 2020 has a mobile preset for the iPad Pro, which is 2048 by 2732 pixels in size. I named this document Gradient, then clicked Create. To make a gradient, select that tool from the toolbar. The G key is a shortcut. Then click on the arrow next to the gradient ramp in the toolbar options at the top. From the pull-down list of gradient presets, there is a folder called Blues that I twirled down, selecting a blue-green gradient. I then chose the linear gradient option. By clicking and dragging a diagonal across the document, the blue-green gradient is created as a layer. It's also possible to click and drag horizontally or vertically if desired. Next, I made a second layer, and for this one, I chose an orange magenta gradient from that folder's choices. Gradients can be further customized. This is done by moving and altering the stops. The top, black ones, can adjust the gradient ramp transition from one color to the next. The bottom stops, which show the colors in the ramp, can be altered by clicking on the desired stop, then clicking on the color swatch that appears below it. This allows access to the color picker. The white circle in the color picker shows which color you've selected. Adjust the stops further if needed. Now that I've created a second gradient, I make a new layer in the document, then click and drag out my new gradient in that layer. Note how the length and direction can affect the result. Experiment a bit until you're satisfied with the look of the gradient. Next, I chose Export Save for Web Legacy. This pops up several options. I chose an 80 quality JPEG for export. I saved the first layer on the desktop as orangemag.jpg. Then I returned to the Photoshop document, turned off visibility for the top layer, and repeated the Export Save for Web Legacy process. Naming the gradient blue-green.jpg. I also saved the layered file for future use if I choose to make more gradient. Now that I've created the two images, I select them both and drag them to the icon in my dock for Lightroom Mobile desktop version. This launches Lightroom Mobile and brings up both images in the import window. I placed both in a previously created album called Gradients. New albums can be created and named from the pull-down menu at the top center of the import window. The images begin to synchronize with Lightroom Classic automatically, as indicated by the upper right cloud icon. Moving to my iPad, I launch Lightroom Mobile and navigate through my library to those two gradients in the album. I export them to my camera roll, which is in my photo app. I do this to make them more accessible for light painting, as Lightroom Mobile's window sometimes brings up a side panel for adjustments that I don't need when using the image as a light source. The Photos app doesn't do this. Placing the camera on a sturdy tripod, I set the exposure time for 30 seconds at ISO 100, which should provide enough time to light paint. The aperture setting is around f8, which is only an approximation of exposure. Some trial and error is involved in light painting. I choose the gradient image and make sure the screen brightness is all the way up. I focus the camera manually so that it doesn't shift when the lights are off. Now I turn off the room lights, and if necessary, block off extraneous light that might affect the exposure. When light painting, I do not pass in front of the camera and try to stay out of the frame area of my composition. Multiple attempts were made before I obtained the result here. Experiment with different gradients and light sources, and you'll have some happy accidents that you'll enjoy.